Nihilism was in the news last week, so I thought we would take this opportunity to really dive in. And I usually don't give a lot of trigger warnings for my material. I really value honesty and vulnerability and truth, but today I will. Today I'm going to put up some trigger warnings. We are going to the darkest corner of nihilism. We're going to be talking manifestos, school shooters, black pill, accelerationism, really the darkest corner of nihilism. Hi, I'm Brit Hartley. I'm an atheist spiritual director, and a lot of what I do is nihilism recovery coaching. And because it came up in the news last week, I thought we would use this as a case study for going into this part of nihilism. And if talking about this isn't psychologically good for you right now, then please skip this video. But as always, I will try to do my best to talk about these things openly and honestly, but provide some tools and shifts and resources, even for, yes, this dark corner of nihilistic thinking. So let's talk about what happened. Last week in Palm Springs, California, a 25-year-old man named Guy Bartkis, which he kind of has a funny last name for doing something not so funny, set off a car bomb outside of a fertility clinic. He died in the explosion. He was trying to upload as he was going. It didn't upload, but four other people were injured in the attack, and authorities are treating the attack as an act of domestic terrorism, meaning it was planned violence to spread some kind of political or ideological point, but it was carried out from someone from within the country, making it domestic terrorism. So why would someone bomb a fertility clinic? After all, historically, most attacks on fertility clinics and abortion providers and related healthcare facilities have been carried out by religious extremists, particularly those aligned with Christian fundamentalism in the United States. So the motivation for those attacks are very different than the Palm Springs bombing, which came from an antinatalist, nihilist perspective. So, examples for Christian fundamentalist attacks, we had the 1998 murder of an abortion provider by a Christian extremist, the 2015 Planned Parenthood shooting in Colorado Springs is another one. And this is the first time where we are seeing in America in recent history where it's not religious extremism, it's nihilistic extremism from the other side. And so what we see and what happens so often when you have a spectrum is that the extremes on both sides begin to look like each other. And so the spectrum is more like a circle than a line. So let's talk about what this kind of extremism in nihilism can look like. Because Bartkis left behind a very chilling audio recording that he was able to upload before he tried to make the bombing live. And basically, in this kind of manifesto, he explained his reasoning. And I'm not going to read all of it. I don't think it's appropriate to post these things at large on the internet, but just if we can grab a few arguments here. He basically said that I'm angry that I exist. He called life itself a kind of disease. We're just pulling out kind of the philosophical arguments that he's making. And he specifically targeted the clinic because it offered IVF. In vitro fertilization. Now, people who are on the extreme fundamentalist groups will be against this because you discard embryos as part of the process, but he's fighting it for a different reason. He saw it as something that helps people have babies, and because he's a severe antinatalist, he called it pro-life ideology, which he was violently against. So because IVF helps bring life into the world, this is what he thought was evil and deserved to be attacked. And so this kind of thinking comes from a fringe belief system that's even sometimes unheard of by people who are nihilists and antinatalists, called EFILism, and that's life spelled backward with an ism at the end, EFIL, life spelled backwards, and then ism, EFILism. And it's a more extreme version of antinatalism, which is the idea that having children is morally wrong because life includes so much suffering. There are many, even friends that I have that are antinatalist that don't believe, especially in today's climate, that it is morally justifiable to bring life into the world. But an EFIList takes it further. They believe that all life is inherently bad and the world would be better off without any living beings at all. And so some EFILists even think that ending life altogether would be doing the world a favor. So in his online life, he was very active in these corners of the internet that promote these views. And he was influenced by also pro-mortalism, which is the belief that not only death preferable to life, not just for yourself, but for everyone else too. It's a deeply nihilistic ideology. And this can lead to another word that I'm going to throw at you. All these terms overlap, but I want to pull these out as we go here. This can lead to accelerationism, which acts the same on the extreme left and the extreme right, but for different reasons. So at its core, accelerationism is a philosophical stance that says the world is broken. Rather than trying to fix or reform it, we should intensify the problems. We should intensify the path towards destruction. So if you, it looks different on either side of the spectrum. So if you believe that it's better that there's no human life, that if you believe that it's better that there is no human life, then a nihilist can be accelerationist, because he's just saying, let's speed up the process towards the earth not having any life because it's going to be better. On the other side, the far side of religious extremism, it's someone convinced that Jesus is coming to save us or some kind of other fundamentalism. So they want to speed up the world ending. And they both want to essentially accelerate human destruction on a large scale. So a lot of terms here, but there are differences between nihilism. So nihilism is the belief that life has no inherent meaning, value, or purpose, but still leaves room for creating meaning. So nihilism isn't inherently bad, and it certainly doesn't inherently lead to violence. There's accelerationism, which is speeding up destruction. There's pro-mortalism, which is that death is preferable to life, and EFILism, which is that all life is inherently bad. There's depression that's always thrown in there, and then there's anti-natalism, which is bringing life into the idea that bringing life into the world is unethical. So there are differences, but in these terms, but they all start to overlap and combine together in especially these dark Reddit subgroups. And actually, I think I mentioned this later on, but the Reddit subgroups that he was most active in have been taken down since the bombing. And hopefully we'll see kind of more of that in the future, because we know, we have data and we have studies, and we know even from his behavior that when you start spending no time in the world and no time in relationships and only in these kinds of subgroups where they're only talking about these arguments, it can turn someone who's kind of on the edge to someone who has been, completely radicalized and ready to commit violence. And so it's a danger that Reddit is trying to look into more. So in the recordings and writings found after the bombing, Bartkis expressed frustration that he had been born at all, that his parents didn't ask for his consent to bring him into a world where there is going to be suffering. And this is a very common theme in anti-natalist thinking, that birth is a kind of harm done without permission. And he tried to live stream the bombing, even though the video, thank heavens, never uploaded. And so experts are increasingly concerned, especially in the past week, that these nihilistic anti-life philosophies like EFILism are starting to reach more people online. And when we say people, like, let's be honest, we're mostly talking about isolated young men who are already depressed, already angry, and in this case, can also already have a history of violence. And so Reddit shut down some of these groups as a response to the bombing. So to summarize, his motivation was the belief that all life is inherently harmful, not just meaningless, but harmful. The anger toward being born, the feeling that existence itself is a curse, resentment towards people who create new life, which he saw as unethical, especially through methods like IVF, which he saw as artificially pushing life forward, which really bothered him. And then some people, and the belief that ending all life would be the most compassionate act and the most moral thing to do. So let's break all this down, first philosophically and then emotionally, because what you'll find is that in most cases, and this is no exception, and I'm no exception to this either, it's emotions that are driving our rationality, not the other way around. So Let's dive into this question deeper. And I think the best way to do this is by using the thought experiment that is really common in these kinds of circles. And it's called the big red button question. If you could press a big red button that would instantly, painlessly, and peacefully end all human life, you can sometimes the question will say all sentient life, but let's just focus on humans. If you could peaceably end all human life, so there's no victims, no one to mourn, would you do it? And even if you should or shouldn't do it, is it the morally right or wrong thing to do? So here are the reasons that some people say yes, especially in this space, I'd push the big red button. The argument would be, number one, preventing suffering is the highest moral good. If no one exists, no one suffers, no more cancer, no more abuse, no more rape, no more war, no more loneliness, no more genocide, no more existential dread. If we could stop the next Holocaust, isn't that good? What if we could stop all future suffering? Number two is that consent matters. People aren't given a choice to be born. So anti-natalists will argue that life is a non-consensual imposition and that needs to end. And so if someone doesn't ask to be here, is it ethical to bring them into a world where they are guaranteed to suffer? The third argument is that suffering outweighs happiness. Some people believe that even the best parts of life, love, joy, and beauty, are not worth the amount of pain that humans and animals experience. For every happy memory, how many people are starving or dying or grieving or being abused right now? And then the arguments for no, don't press the button. These people usually come from humanist or existentialist or spiritual, or just have a more hopeful personality in general. They usually suffer less in general in their life. So the arguments against this would be that life has value, even with suffering, that pain is part of life, but so is joy and meaning and connection and growth. And people feel like life is worth living even when it's hard. So we don't need to erase life to reduce suffering. We need to work to make it better. And then really the big one is that no one has the right to decide that for everyone. So even if you think that life isn't worth it, other people do. So pressing the button because people didn't consent to be here also takes away their consent and their choice and their agency to stay alive. And so it's one of the strongest arguments that choosing not to have kids can be considered ethical. Ending everyone is authoritarian. And then the third argument is suffering isn't the whole story. Some argue that pain gives life its depth. If we only aim to avoid suffering, we'd miss out on meaning and beauty and love. So the goal shouldn't be zero pain. It should be, a richer existence. And then I hear this argument from scientists. This would be like a Neil deGrasse Tyson point, I feel like, where life is so rare in the universe, it would be such a great tragedy to end the only witness we have to the universe. And then the last argument is that if you end life on Earth, this is more of a philosophical point, that there's no outside perspective by which to call that good. So now if there's a lot of other life in the universe and they're living peacefully and they're more advanced and they're less violent, then you could make the argument that we don't need to be here and this is a failed planet and a failed experiment and we need to shut it down. But without that comparison, you can't actually remove the only morality in the universe and then call it good, because there's no outside perspective by which to call that good anymore. And so usually the strongest argument is that it's more ethical to choose not to have children. If you are anti-natalist, choose to be vegan, choose to have a small footprint, choose to reduce suffering, than to choose the removal of life and choice for everyone else. Because even if it's an illusion and people don't realize how much they're suffering, that illusion is their reality. If you ask most people, do you want to die right now? They will answer no. And so we see this early form of EFILism, or the idea that it's the highest morality to take yourself out and take as many people as you can with you. We see early forms of this with the Columbine shooters, which I remember because I was in the 8th grade when it happened, and I was in an English class and we had to write to some of the families affected. I don't know if it ever got sent to them, but it's a foundational memory of my childhood. And Eric Harris, one of the Columbine shooters, one of the 2 boys, especially believed that humanity was a disease, and he fantasized in his journals about wiping everyone out. He wrote, "I want to burn the world. I want to kill mankind." Now, Dylan was a little bit different. He was more depressed and suicidal than Eric was, and he was full of just really existential despair and loneliness. And so he wrote things like "The world is a nightmare." So he was more brokenhearted at the nature of reality, whereas Eric was more revengeful about the nature of reality. Together, the two boys built a narrative where life is meaningless, people are stupid, cruel, or fake. They were superior and saw no reason to keep living or to let others live. And so how this connects to the big red button mindset is that the Columbine shooters didn't just want to die, they wanted to take everyone else out with them. It's not unlike the extreme yes answer to the big red button question, but this time without compassion. Instead of pushing the button to stop suffering, they wanted to punish the world for being broken, for being painful. They wanted to punish the world for being what it is. And so we compare that to someone like Guy Bartkis, the Palm Springs bomber. Bartkis acted from an anti-natalist logic that life is a mistake, reproduction is unethical, and ending life is ending suffering. So Columbine was a little bit more fueled by hatred and alienation than ethics, but both worldviews are very nihilistic and share a rejection in the value of life itself. And this is why this corner of nihilism, in whatever form it takes, even though there's little differences between these people, whatever form it takes, this is the most dangerous corner of nihilism. Now, I've met with hundreds, maybe thousands of people who maybe they wouldn't call themselves a nihilist, but they're definitely like, that's where they are in their thinking. And there's a huge reason between not having a reason to live, which we can work with and isn't inherently dangerous. That can often be the dark night of the soul or the rock bottom that can lead towards a very meaningful and thriving life, which I would claim for myself as well. But there's a difference between not having a reason to live and not having a reason to not die, or not having a reason to allow others to live. That second group is much more dangerous and not something that I work with directly because of kind of the level that we're at. It would be above my pay grade technically. So what do we do about this? Now, there are philosophical arguments to be made, but what we find in the data is that it's not the best tool. We can talk about it. We'll do that first. What philosophical arguments can be made against this philosophy? But what we're going to find is that it's much more of an emotional argument or an emotional reality that is then masked by philosophy. But let's do the philosophy first. It's probably honestly easier. So a lot of the EFILism philosophy comes from David Benatar, and his claim goes something like this: pain is bad, the presence of pain is bad, the absence of pain is good, even if no one benefits from it. But the absence of pleasure is not bad unless someone else exists to miss it. And so he's making what's called an asymmetrical argument. It says that pain always counts against existence, but pain only counts for existence if someone is around to enjoy it. And so this logic is the philosophical backbone of EFILism. The idea that non-existence is preferable to existence because it avoids suffering without denying anything, because it's not going to consider that it's bad that you missed out on potential good. So it's an asymmetrical argument. So what's wrong with that? And I think actually someone podcasted with Sam Harris a long time ago about that. In the comments, I'll put a link to that podcast that just came to my memory right now. I remember someone arguing that with him. So what's wrong with that? What's wrong with this asymmetrical argument? There have been many philosophers, particularly Rivka Weinberg, who critiques this and says that it's an unfair and inconsistent logic. So Benatar makes pleasure optional, but pain mandatory. And that's biased. That's a bias. That's an asymmetrical bias. So he says that he says not existing and not being in pain is good, but not existing and missing out on joy is neutral, not bad. And so Weinberg says you can't count one thing, like pain, as morally important, but then ignore the other, pleasure. That's cherry picking your values. And this logic doesn't work anywhere else. If you applied David Benatar's thinking to other areas, it would lead to very absurd conclusions. So you wouldn't say that it's good that an imaginary person didn't get cancer suffer because they were never born. Like we don't say that that's good. That doesn't feel like a moral good. But Benatar's view says that it is morally good that they didn't suffer, even if they didn't exist in the first place. So she's pointing out that non-existence can't actually be morally better because morality is about how we treat actual people, not hypothetical ones. So the bottom line in plain language is you can't say it's better never to be born just because you avoid suffering. That's ignoring all the good stuff in life and the miracle that it is to live at all. And you can't apply ethics to people who never existed. Ethics is about how we treat real people. And then you can also get into Kantian ethics, that existence has intrinsic value. So from a Kantian perspective, humans are ends in themselves, not just vessels of suffering. So each human life has dignity, not just because of pleasure or pain, just because we are rational, moral creatures. So pressing the big red button would be using everyone as a means to an end. You're using humans as a means to end suffering. And Kant says that that's unethical. It's wrong to annihilate moral agents just to eliminate their potential suffering. That denies their dignity. And then you can bring in liberal humanism, that killing all life removes everyone's right to choose. It assumes your assessment of suffering overrides theirs because many people choose life even amid suffering. And ethics, especially liberal ethics, values autonomy. So you don't get to make the ultimate decision for other people based on your own philosophical despair. You can use utilitarianism. I mean, you can attack this from all sides. You can use utilitarianism that focuses on maximizing well-being, and that pressing the big red button is too extreme, that we should work on reducing suffering, not eliminating all experiencers. So if pain outweighs joy, the solution is improving life, not ending it. And then you can bring in existentialism, and you can bring in absurdism from Camus. You can bring in Viktor Frankl, that life includes suffering, but it's our response to suffering that makes life meaningful. Frankl says suffering ceases to be suffering the moment it finds meaning. So if EFILists are right that life is suffering, their conclusion is defeatist, and it's not philosophically necessary because our meaning can come from the ways in which we suffer. And if you take away my option for that by throwing up your hands and saying end it all because life is suffering, then that's not a philosophical necessity. It doesn't have to go there. Surveys consistently show people rate their lives as meaningful despite hardship. So are any of these 20-year-old, young, isolated men doing this kind of philosophy where they're looking at this from different philosophical angles? Are they on Reddit discussing Kantian ethics? The answer is no, which is why I don't recommend arguing philosophy as your main goal, because this is not purely logically driven. And we aren't, as you know from my other content, we aren't purely logical creatures. The reason they're attracted to these philosophies at all is not because they are so smart and they are rational and it's the only rational conclusion that you can make. They end up on these corners of the internet because they're suffering, because they're angry, because they're depressed, because they're suicidal, because they're struggling, because they've been rejected by women, because they're isolated. And that's an emotional response that then finds a philosophical outlet for your feelings about being alive. So then rather than work through philosophy to get to the emotions, it's much more effective to go the other way around. Let's change your life and like the glasses by which you see and interpret life. And guess what? The philosophy magically changes on its own without doing any, work and opening up a book by Kant. Like we don't have to do it that way. We have to actually get to the emotion of why they ended up in these corners of the internet, and then the philosophy fixes itself essentially. So if you're feeling like life is meaningless or that human suffering outweighs any good, that's not just a belief, it's a felt experience. Your nervous system is fried, you're isolated, you're sleep deprived, you're eating garbage, your days are blurring together. Of course life seems pointless, but you're not broken. Your brain is just doing its job under really bad conditions. And philosophy doesn't grow well in depleted soil. So the first step is really to improve the soil. What actually helps people get better is to get off the internet and spend 6 months reducing depression. So the first thing would be like, fix your body. And they don't like this. And I didn't like this either when people said, like when I was trying to talk philosophy with someone when I was in my nihilism, and they were like, oh, like, why don't you go touch some grass? And I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? Go touch some grass. Like, I can't think myself out of this problem. And it was really frustrating for me to learn that when my body changed, my views and my thoughts changed. And I would like to think that I'm more rational than that, but I'm not. Like, nobody is. And so we actually have to go into our body and fix our body in order to change our philosophy, because we're just not that rational. And how we see the world tells us more about like the state of our body than actual like, oh, we're making rational arguments that can't be thought of any other way. So we don't need to run a marathon, but your brain is part of your body. And when your physical system is off, your worldview follows. So this is when you start doing things like getting sunlight in your eyes within an hour of waking, moving every day, going outside, eating something with protein and real nutrients. I hate all of this. Like, I wish that my brain like could just think straight without doing any of this, because I don't like doing any of this. I like hanging out in my own head too much to care about this stuff. But it does change your thoughts. It really does. And so it's not about like health. It's not about looking better. It's not about any of that. Nihilists usually don't even care about that anyway. It's about getting your brain out of survival mode so that you can actually think about these things from multiple perspectives, rather than getting stuck in like the worst thought loop that you can't think yourself out of because your brain is broken. You know what I mean? And so again, like, I hate this news because in my own nihilism that didn't get this violent, but certainly I was like thinking about these things. I really did think this is just a philosophical problem. I didn't take into account that my brain was sick and I wasn't sleeping and I was home with young children. And when some of that changed, like some of that aspect of my life changed, and I was able to take better care of myself, a lot of these philosophical problems solved themselves, because my lens by which I was seeing suffering, or I was seeing reality, or I was seeing these arguments, got better and got healthier because my brain was healthier. So these EFILists have been hurt by the world. It's an emotional wound. You don't see this philosophy ever with people who have meaningful jobs, good relationships, good mental health, really good friends and family, meaning, purpose. We just don't see it. A 2021 study published in Frontiers in Psychology found that existential nihilism is significantly correlated with depression, anxiety, and loneliness, where we really don't get hardcore existential nihilism unless you have also with it some kind of depression, anxiety, and loneliness, particularly for the young adults. You just don't get hardcore nihilism and want to blow up the world when your life is good. It just doesn't happen, because there's other ways to see the nature of reality and see life than the way that like depression will only let you see things from like the worst lens. So we have to like cut your exposure to cyclical content loops. If your media diet is full of doom and violence and climate collapse and AI apocalypse and humanity is a disease content, your brain will start to believe that that worldview is reality. And so you have to start replacing that content with something constructive. Podcasts about psychology, conversations where people have changed their minds, conversations where people have come out of nihilism, documentaries about people rebuilding or creating, or why their lives mattered. It helps. You're not just brainwashing yourself with positivity. You're counteracting a deep bias that shows only the worst of humanity, because your depression and your isolation is only seeing the worst. And so your brain can't believe in any other argument if it's not shown any, and it'll get stuck into a worldview that isn't even reality, because there are many other ways to see reality, because it's just not getting any other kind of content. Another one is get around people who are building, not just collapsing. If your social circle is full of people who only tear things down, then your philosophy will stay in the basement. So you'll have to start spending time, even online, with people who are trying to grow something or build something or have some kind of purpose, or who talk about things that they love, because human meaning is contagious. We borrow emotional tone from the people around us. So find builders. And then also finding meaning through service and realizing that your actions actually do affect the world. They affect other people. If you can do something each day or each week that helps someone else, it breaks the self-reinforcing loop that nothing that I do matters. When if suffering is bad, then reducing suffering should be good. And yet these men usually are in basements, not actively reducing suffering in any way. And so it helps because meaning comes from action, not just from thinking. So once you start to act like your life has meaning, your brain starts to update accordingly, not because you tricked it, you're just giving it some more evidence. And then also doing something novel or slightly challenging every week will disrupt the frozen worldview that says that life is always like this. You don't have to go skydiving, but just like try something that you're bad at, visit a new part of the city, talk to someone outside of your usual bubble. Depressive nihilism really thrives in this predictable, gray, repetitive environment of predicting that it always sucks and it's always going to be suffering and life is always bad. And novelty introduces new data, which makes it harder for a brain to cling to these always and never thoughts, which can lead to these thought loops that are really hard to get out of. So I have never met with a nihilistic client who is ready to bomb a fertility clinic. That would honestly be above my pay grade. That needs more intensive care than I'm qualified to give. But I certainly see clients who have been considering these ideas on a day when they're having just like a dark spiral and they're struggling with a reason to live. And what we do is we tackle that body side first and then the philosophy second. And what that does is it gets us on an upward spiral rather than a downward spiral, where your life gets a little bit better, your relationships get better, your meaning gets better, your purpose get better, you get more sunshine, you're getting better food, you're getting, your brain is getting healthier. And then you're also getting tools for life, like from existentialism or some of the other isms that I talked about. And then you're on this upward spiral of your life getting better, your tools getting better, your life getting better, your tools getting better, instead of the downward spiral, which is nihilism is making your depression and isolation worse, and depression and isolation is making your nihilism worse, which is the downward spiral. And then if you isolate to certain groups of the internet where this is the only thing that they talk about, it's the only data coming into the brain, and that brain is also very sick in the sense that like this person is not thriving in their life, and also they've been hurt and haven't processed it, that's where it can get really dark. So as much as the dark corners of Reddit like to think that they're doing philosophy, what they're really doing is using philosophy to justify their feelings, which are resentful and depressed and violent and hurt, to be honest. And when we address those wounds, the philosophy changes all on its own. So unfortunately for this bomber and his manifesto, though, he won't get the chance because he was so isolated and so entrenched in these online groups that his brain saw no way out of doing this. He did also have a history of violence. His friend said that he had a history of pushing boundaries and using explosives and things like that. And then when you combine that with being really resentful towards life, and combine that with isolation and depression, and combine that with all of these kinds of philosophical arguments where no one is good enough in philosophy to give different points of view and show where those arguments break down, where it's only an echo chamber, that's where you'll see the darkest corner of the internet, which can start to look in violence-wise like religious fundamentalism, which we see in the bombing of this clinic, but we also see like in the journals of school shooters where it can become others violent. Now, usually nihilism is much more likely to be self-violent through either suicide or slow suicide. But when you have this history of violence and you have this level of ideological brainwashing, essentially, it can become others violent, which I think we need to be honest about and talk about. So as always, follow me here for more no nonsense spirituality, where I will talk about the worst of fundamentalism, but I'm also going to talk about the worst of nihilism so that every person can navigate that healthy place in between, where you have some order and structure that is good for your brain and good for your life and gives you a routine and a story to live by, and those things that are just tend towards human thriving. But it's not fundamentalism. You have room to grow. You have room to change. You have an ability to change your mind. That's the place that humans do best. And each person kind of has to navigate their own place in between order and chaos, in between fundamentalism and nihilism. Because as we saw today with this, the extremes of both ends are not good for the person, but also not good for the world. So next week, I'm going to be talking about this controversial idea that went semi-viral on social media. It got a lot of conversation on social media. It's the idea from British philosopher John Gray, the question of, is humanity progressing, or are we essentially the same and the only thing that changes is the technology? So we're going to be talking about that question next week. And stay tuned for more no-nonsense spirituality. I know we went to some heavy arguments today, but I hope by like bringing it to the light and talking about it honestly and talking about ways that people have gotten through it, ways to make it better, different ways to see answers to the question of the big red button, can hopefully do more in helping than just like keeping these places dark. Because like not talking about it and not giving other ways to think about these philosophical issues can sometimes make people even more trapped, because sometimes shadows just need some light in order to be able to break the level of indoctrination and brainwashing it can be to be in some of these like Reddit subgroups. So I hope that was helpful, and I hope I did more good than harm by talking about it, but I'd love to hear your thoughts to this episode. I've never posted an episode that was maybe this, I don't want to say controversial. I'm not sure it's controversial, but that, you know, I read some quotes from manifestos. And so that's new for me. And I want to know like how that landed with you guys. So please let me know in the comments, especially for this episode. I'm not sure if I did too little or too much or just right when wanting to talk about these things, but in a way that hopefully helps more than harms. So let me know how I did, honestly, because this is new for me and I'm still trying to figure out that balance for myself too. So that's it from me. See you next week from Brit Hartley.